This is LING 270, Language, Technology, and Society, Module 4, Printing. In this lesson, we'll talk about ancient forms of printing. So I mentioned in the introduction that Gutenberg was very important to the development of printing technology. But it's important to note that printing is actually a very ancient technology. We have artifacts going back to 1800 BC, which we can consider kinds of printing. They're mechanical devices which can reproduce images. So we see some examples here from Mesopotamia where there are hematite stones which had images carved into them to form a kind of cylinder. And then this cylinder could be rolled on a piece of clay that would reproduce that a pattern over and over again on that clay. So in archaeological findings, we found these cylinders as well as the clay with the impressions made on them as well. So we can see that this idea of that these artifacts actually existed even almost 4,000 years ago. And it's interesting to note too that these kind of cylindrical seals is actually very similar to the rotary press, which is fairly common today. And we'll talk about that at the end of the module. And these kinds of artifacts weren't just found in Mesopotamia. We also found them in Mesoamerica as well. So this shows that this was actually a fairly widespread concept. So here there are some artifacts found called the San Andres cylinder seals, which were seals that were made of ceramic, and they could reproduce an image in a very similar way as those cylinders found in Babylonia. And what we likely think that these kinds of artifacts were used were not necessarily for reproducing writing, but for producing decorative designs. Likely in this case, they were used for decorating cloth. And possibly the kinds of symbols on here may contain some symbols which are the oldest writing system of in America. So they contained Mayan hieroglyphs on them. So this is another, this artifact is interesting for that reason as well. And from our decipherment unit, we talked about the symbol systems found in the Indus Valley, from the Indus Valley civilization. And a lot of these symbols are found on kinds of stamps. So a stamp could also be considered a kind of printing device. So we have these a carved out stamp here, which when impressed into a kind of clay will reproduce that kind of image, and that kind of stamp could be reproduced over and over again. So this artifact dates about from the mid to late 3rd millennium BC, so almost 5,000 years ago. We see just how ancient of a technology this is. And we see that these stamps usually have depictions of humans, animals, or fantastic creatures, and the symbols of the Indus Valley script, which as we mentioned, this script is something that has not been deciphered or may not be decipherable. And what's possible for what this stamp might have been used for is to be a kind of signature, as a way to for an owner to have a way of marking an object to know that object belongs to them. And with this stamp, it's possible to reproduce that image the exact way every time, rather than try to carve out the same image every time. So the process of reproducing that kind of image was very beneficial in that way, as a way to indicate authenticity. So here we see that there are 3 examples of ancient kinds of printing technologies, which all involved a hard material or as a printer, and usually involved clay as a medium. And the force would simply be hand power. Just pressing it in with your hand would be sufficient for it. So another kind of printing, which is pretty common before the development of the printing press, is a technique called woodblock printing. Woodblock printing, as the name makes clear, is a stamp made by carving a design into wood, which results in a kind of stamp that can be used to reproduce an image or also text. Woodblock printing has been used for both purposes, not just for decorative purposes. So sometimes they're used to print a kind of pattern onto textile, or sometimes to make a kind, certain kinds of artwork. Yeah, and as I said, it can be used for both decorative purposes and for literature. So, and this was particularly common in East Asia. Reproducing documents with wood blocks was actually very common, even before the development of the printing press. So this is an important thing to kind of keep in mind. So yeah, I'll talk a little more about woodblock printing in China here. So woodblock printing is something that is very highly esteemed in Chinese history. It's considered one of the 4 great inventions of China, including the technique of paper making, which we'll come back to, gunpowder, and the compass. So the significance of printing was recognized as well. The technique of woodblock printing is also a fairly old one. The oldest artifacts that we found for woodblock printing from China are almost 2,000 years old, much older than Gutenberg's printing press, and they were used to reproduce the documents in a very similar way. So over here on the pictures on the side here show a printing of the Diamond Sutra, so a Buddhist text, which was printed around the year 868 AD. And this document right here is the oldest surviving printing document. So this just shows how advanced the technology was in China, of the advancement of printing technologies. And by the 9th century, woodblock printing wasn't a novelty invention. It was something that was very commonplace all throughout China. So that's something important to note as well. And things that these wood blocks were used for were to reproduce Confucian texts, Buddhist scriptures, dictionaries, math, etc. So it was especially important for reproducing these texts, which were very useful for a wide number of people. And instead of having, so the need was recognized very early that having a mechanical device which could reproduce a text great amounts without having to write out the whole thing was a very, very useful invention. So it's important when we're talking about the printing press to realize that the printing press as developed in Europe was actually a fairly late invention, and that the technologies related to printing are actually much older. So that's something to keep in mind while we're going through this module.